Welcome back to The Unthinkable. For this unsolved mystery, we need to travel back to a time when some of you weren't even thought of to be conceived. Nearly 25 years ago, in the year 2000, one of the strangest and most baffling murders to happen in an area right after a crowded, jam-packed video shoot, where you would think that there would have been at least one person to see what happens, took place. Well, it turns out, there was one person who claimed to see something, but the details of this witness's story have done nothing but foster more questions. Until this day, this case has left investigators confused as it remains unsolved. This is the strange and perplexing case of 18-year-old Michelle Okeefe. If you ask people who were around during the year 2000 what they remembered most about it, they'd likely tell you about the huge scandal surrounding the Y2K event that was supposed to take the entire world by storm. More specifically, the year 2000 was supposed to cause a catastrophic malfunction across the digital landscape of electronic systems and computers. The idea of Y2K even had some people believing that electronics all over the world would malfunction, leading the world into some kind of dark age due to a worldwide power outage. But as the clock struck 12, everyone realized that it had all been nothing but propaganda. And the world that once stood still, holding their breaths, awaiting the apocalypse, would return to everyday normalcy. And so too would parties and music production. Kid Rock, one of the world's biggest rock and heavy metal musicians in the early 2000s, hit the music charts with his fourth album release, Devil Without a Cause. And as this music career continued to skyrocket, visual adaptations of his albums would manifest in the form of music videos. It was during one of these Kid Rock music video shoots that an 18-year-old college student named Michelle Okeefe was in attendance with one of her best friends, Jennifer Peterson. Set to appear as extras in the background of the video scene, Michelle was excited for the opportunity to perhaps take one step closer to her dream of becoming a Hollywood actress. On February 22nd, Michelle and Jennifer make the drive to Los Angeles separately due to Michelle having to go her separate ways after the video shoot to make sure she didn't miss her evening class. Once they reach city limits, Michelle decides to carpool with her friend into downtown Los Angeles, some 60 miles from where she decides to leave her brand new blue Mustang at a park and ride location right off the freeway in Palmdale. She parks under a light, gets into her friend's car, and they're off. They attend the video concert as planned, where Michelle and her friend can be seen here in the front row. But the video production goes over the scheduled end time, which means that Michelle is officially late for class. Aside from her running late, she also needs to change clothes from her punk rock fit into a more casual, appropriate attire. So Jennifer makes the drive back to Michelle's car to drop her off for a quick change before she heads off to class. As Jennifer watches Michelle get into her vehicle, she sees her tail lights light up as if she's about to leave. So Jennifer feels comfortable enough to pull off, expecting her friend to soon be in tow right behind her. But Michelle doesn't leave the lot. Instead, she pulls her car into another parking spot where she intends to change her clothing. And this decision is likely what sealed her fate. Jennifer had no way of knowing it, but this would be the last time she ever saw her friend alive again. Not too long after Jennifer exits the lot, 4 shots ring out in the night air. 4 shots, striking Michelle in the face and upper chest area. Newly hired parking security guard and former Sergeant Army vet Raymond Jennings is on site, and around 9:30, he hears a car alarm echoing throughout the area. As he moves towards the sound of the alarm, he hears a gunshot ring out, followed by 3 more shots. He immediately radios in to his supervisor to alert him that there have been shots fired in the area. As responders make their way to the scene, Raymond makes his, and what he sees when he gets there is carnage. In a later interview, when asked if he'd checked for a pulse or tried to provide CPR, he answered no, and that once he'd reached the location, he'd found Michelle slumped in her driver's seat with several gunshot wounds, but that he did see a faint pulse, and her hand, which was twitching. This would later become a key part of the investigation into Michelle's murder. But Raymond Jennings wasn't the only witness on site of the murder that night. There were 4 other individuals there that night nearby that heard the car alarm and the subsequent shots fired. They'd been in the parking lot smoking weed and listening to loud music. They referred to the shots as tapping noises. After responders reached the scene and declared Michelle deceased, a lengthy process of uncovering the mystery of exactly what happened that night began with investigators questioning their top witness, Raymond Jennings. During his interview, they asked him about his view of the crime scene, which he claimed his view was obscured by another vehicle parked right next to Michelle. But little did Raymond Jennings know that the more he talked and offered investigators testimony, the more he made himself out to be the main suspect in their eyes. They believed that Raymond was giving them first-hand account information of the murder, with details that only the killer would have known, like the angle of the bullets and the order they were fired in. He told them how it appeared to him that the gunshot wound in her chest was the very first shot fired, and that it was extremely close range. To investigators, Jennings was a cache of information. In fact, to them, he knew just a little too much about a shooting that he claimed he hadn't seen firsthand. When Raymond Jennings went home that night from the interview, inside, he knew that investigators considered him the prime suspect now. So authorities moved to ascertain a motive. Was it an attempted robbery or an attempted sexual assault? All options were on the table, but they continued to collect evidence. What they were pretty sure of was that Raymond Jennings knew the answer. However, it would take quite some time for authorities to make a move on Jennings. 5 years after the vicious and sudden murder of Michelle Okeefe, authorities officially arrested Sergeant Raymond Lee Jennings as their one and only suspect. Jennings' testimony that he'd seen Michelle's car rolling backwards after the gunshots went off and that he ducked for cover was the nail in his own coffin. Prosecutors believe that on that night, Raymond Jennings approached Michelle in her car and had attempted to make some kind of unwarranted advancement on her. But that when she refused him and fought back, that he'd pulled his gun and executed her, believing that no one else was close enough to witness the incident. But there were problems with this theory. The first and most obvious being that Jennings was unarmed the night Michelle was killed when responders and police arrived on the scene. Had he somehow ditched his weapon? Then there was the fact that Jennings was registered as having a .38 caliber handgun, but the autopsy report revealed Michelle was killed with a 9mm firearm. The first trial went underway regardless, where the jury was deadlocked, causing a mistrial. Then a second jury examined the case, but they too could not come to a conclusion, resulting in another mistrial via deadlock. The entire time, Raymond Jennings maintained his innocence, all the while believing that there was no way prosecutors would be able to convict him due to the lack of evidence and weak case.
I sit here as an innocent man, and I've heard you speak on God as Christ is my Lord and Savior. I will stand before God, and this is one sin that I will not be judged for. I'm at peace in my life, and I laugh and I smile because I hold no remorse because I didn't kill your sister. Jesus is my Lord and Savior, and I will stand before him. And I'll stand before him with you, and with you, and we'll answer to this question.
Then, a third trial, which was moved back to Michelle's hometown, where media coverage had already painted Jennings as a ruthless villain. This was when Raymond's composure in the face of scrutiny and accusation began to fall apart. He knew that the odds were stacked against him here. And sure enough, the verdict for the third trial came down. Guilty of second-degree murder, with a sentence of 40 years to life in prison. Michelle's father proposed the question of why Raymond, a trained serviceman for the Army, never once attempted to provide any kind of aid the moment he found Michelle had a pulse, however faint it was. Raymond's response, however, was that he did not want to disturb or contaminate the crime scene, a statement that Michelle's father found hard to believe. Mike Okeefe, much like the investigators, believed that Raymond Jennings was at the very least involved with his daughter's murder because he just knew too much. He provided the police with too many details for someone who hadn't committed the crime. But the gunshot caliber rounds weren't the only problem with the evidence either, or rather, lack thereof. Jennings' uniform tested negative for gunshot residue. There was also blood residue found underneath Michelle's fingernails that, when tested, proved that it hadn't been Raymond Jennings' DNA that was present, a fact that the prosecutors had misled jurors to believe was contaminated. Despite no physical or damning evidence being found, a jury had somehow still sentenced Raymond Jennings to die in prison. Raymond Jennings spent 11 years of his time behind bars. 11 years away from his wife and 5 children. 11 years spent with the mass media believing that he was a cold-blooded killer. But all of the lack of evidence would eventually work to Jennings' benefit. It was the son of Jeffrey Ehrlich, Clinton, who was surfing the web and one day came across the bizarre case of Raymond Jennings and Michelle Okeefe and thought to himself how the details and evidence didn't make much sense. Clinton brought the case to his father and asked him if he would represent Jennings in a possible trial to fight for his freedom. And once Jeffrey dug into the case files, it was what he did not find that convinced him to take the case. Clinton believed that Jennings had been wrongfully convicted and made a scapegoat for the authorities. In addition to the lack of evidence against Jennings, there was the fact that there were others present the night Michelle was murdered. Others who had never been brought in for questioning. The 4 individuals who were seen smoking marijuana and playing loud music, 2 of which were found to be Blood's gang members. 17-year-old Victoria Richardson and her 18-year-old boyfriend Andrew Stewart, who was later convicted of a series of crimes including home invasions and carjackings. One incident included the gunpoint carjacking theft of a Ford Mustang, much like the one Michelle owned. As a result, he was sentenced to 31 years in prison, and when he was arrested, he was wearing an earring that was identical to the one Michelle was wearing the night she was killed, in which the second earring was found to be missing from her body. The gun Stewart used in his crimes was also found to be a 9mm handgun. None of the 4 individuals that were present that night were ever questioned about the murder. And after 11 years of long suffering for a murder that he could not be tied to with a shred of evidence, Sergeant Raymond Jennings was ordered to be released by a judge immediately in 2016. Raymond Jennings was completely exonerated and found innocent of any wrongdoing, and for his time served, he was awarded a mere $538,440 in compensation from the state of Florida. Michelle's father, to this day, still believes that he had something to do with his daughter's murder. However, her case is still ongoing and her killer remains unknown. Thank you for watching.